Hello guys, I'm Fiona Apollo and I'm a human person who does art commentary. In recent months, more and more people have been discussing the rise of artificial intelligence capable of creating artworks that are comparable to works created by humans, and it's understandably ended up sparking a debate on the ethics behind this. One big problem that has arisen is AI image generators are creating artworks by copying the styles of multiple current artists and basically allowing no safeguards for them to protect their IPs. And these generated pieces are to be potentially used with no credit or acknowledgement to the original artist whatsoever. Subsequently, this situation has ended up begging the question, are AIs going to cause more trouble for human artists soon, if not already? It's no secret as to how advanced AI has become in regards to collecting visual data and recreating it with just a few clicks. And this has gotten to the point where you can do things like create realistic portraits of fictional people, specifically a very narrow category of people, which we will touch upon in a bit. You can insert additional frames into an animation, as was seen with the trend of creating 60-frame animations. You can generate very cryptic and cursed-looking memes, which, while entertaining, are still pulling from existing images, and even generate illustrations in the styles of some prominent artists online, which is going to be quite a big bulk of what we focus on today. People are especially concerned about this for a couple of reasons, including the amount of art theft that is happening and will continue to happen as this trend progresses. People are becoming worried about the way in which artists are losing the battle of ownership over their own creations, as these generators push the idea that art online is something that can be just taken and used however you want without a second thought. And it's also raised the question as to whether this will have implications relating to the art industry, such as with large companies effectively cheesing artists out of a job. I think it's important to just state that it isn't particularly the fault of these AI programs or the people who just want to dabble with them. The real blame lies with the people coding and developing them who want to use them for profit at the expense of real people's livelihoods. These products aren't faceless, and there's a big push from tech bros especially, it seems, to use these generators for a multitude of things that actively go against a lot of the current moral standings around online artworks. This is kind of scary from an artist's perspective, and in my opinion, this technology has some very unnerving potential to be exploited by capitalism. Why pay someone to make something when you can get a robot to just mash it together for free? How's that for a slice of fried gold, eh fellas? Yeah, this whole AI thing is starting to feel very dystopian, so let's talk about it. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I talk about a lot of things, and I make a lot of things too, so please check out my other stuff. Please note that any opinions or thoughts I give are purely speculative and should not be taken as fact. I can only tell you what I think, and not what you should think, so remember to do your own research in order to come to your own decisions. Let's dive in. Alright, so let's begin with a short, impartial introduction to these generators. Essentially, these AI programs are trained to sample through millions upon millions of visual data pieces available online, such as photos, GIFs, graphics, the list goes on and on. If it's on a screen, it's being sampled, and will more or less interpret what it sees to translate it into a new image. Think of it kind of like a collage. For the most part, this has been tested and well received by people who maybe just wanted to mess around with them and their friends. There was an AI generator that was going around a few months ago that allowed people to submit drawings which would be used to generate realistic renders of a human portrait. A lot of people actually use this to create realistic versions of fictional characters, and admittedly, I also tried it out and thought that the concept was pretty cool because the way people were using it kind of reminded me of P-Crews. A lot of people just wanted to test out these AIs and mess around for curiosity's sake, and I don't think those people should be condemned for doing so. You're allowed to have a bit of fun. The surface level interpretation of applications like these is that they allow non-artists to create pieces that they otherwise wouldn't have the capacity or skills or resources to make on their own without paying someone else to do so. And not everyone has that spare bit of change, so it's a little bit tricky to make non-artists understand why these things are so worrying. After all, we as the artists in question know how prideful it can feel when we own something that is visually pleasing that we made ourselves, and that's a pretty common thing for people to feel. Art is a labour-intensive medium, and sometimes people want a quick hit of serotonin without the legwork. I'm not about to go around slamming people for that. But like most technology, despite the positive aspects of this, there are still a few surface-level issues remaining, and a lot of it seems to come down to the information being fed to these AIs initially. AIs can still get a bit confused regarding the subject found in certain images they sample, and can actually get tripped up by drawing correlations to things that aren't actually interlinked. And this tends to be what causes some of that uncanny distortion that you see in a lot of generated images. I couldn't manage to find the original post regarding this, but a few years ago, one person inputted several images taken from real life into an AI and asked what the correlation was between them. And the answer that the AI came up with is that all of these images had giraffes in them. Except, not a single image had a giraffe in it. These images were all just pictures of woodland, if I remember correctly. And basically what caused this to happen is the fact that pictures of giraffes are a lot more saturated on the internet compared to how many giraffes are actually roaming the planet, causing the AI to think that giraffes are a lot more common than they actually are, and attributed things like colour patterns, shapes, and potentially the visual representation of a giraffe's habitat to conclude that a giraffe was indeed present in these images. So obviously, despite the fact that AIs are very good at replicating real-life pictures, it still depends on how clear of an image and how many images it samples to define the end result. Another caveat to this is that I mentioned before about creating portraits of specific types of fictional people, and what I meant by this is that the conventionally attractive characters tended to look objectively less uncanny looking, whereas male, POC, or otherwise unconventional characters were a lot more hit and miss, and this comes down again to that visual sampling. There are far more images on the internet of pale, pretty people, both in actual photographs like on Instagram as well as in illustrations, of which they tend to take up quite a large portion. And this results in there being far less images to sample when it comes to people who do not fall into this categorization. And sadly, another issue of this is that there tends to also be a lot more caricatures of these types of people as well. This has quite a few connotations, one being that we obviously still need more equal footing for non-white people to be shown in all forms of media. Another connotation is that possibly due to internet access, or stability is probably the better word, being more widespread in wealthier and more privileged countries, it seems only natural that images of people who live within these countries are more widespread, but regardless, it is still pretty jarring. So the bottom line is that this is some technology that is mostly being used to experiment and not necessarily make anything on a commercial scale quite yet, though I can imagine that they are probably trying to find ways to do that as we speak. But the issue with this decidedly objective line of thinking is that it only works if you put the focus squarely on the consumer who doesn't really have any stake in the AI's development, so obviously it's going to appear harmless because we're not really taking into account the detriments that it can cause to the people who are in opposition to it. So let's look into the concerns and potential consequences these AI programs may have when it comes to real people. Now, if we actually look at the implications of these generators in a more humanitarian way, the situation surrounding it becomes a little bit more disturbing. To start off, if a generator is heavily referencing current working artists, this brings up the debate of whether or not this is considered art theft. If we want to look at it in a more technical sense, nothing has been stolen, but if people were to associate their artworks with a computer instead of a person, it creates this really bad dissonance between the artist and the artwork, and it no longer feels like they have any claim to it. In short, this artist's sense of identity has been lost, and their ability to directly profit from their work disappears alongside it. It's a very similar thing to what happened with digital art versus traditional art. A lot of people claim that digital art isn't real art, and therefore a lot of people feel like their identities as artists get stripped away when they use a computer, because people just invalidate it everywhere you go. And that really isn't fair. If you create something, you're an artist in my opinion, and as much as I want to not endorse these generators, that can, to an extent, include people who create work using these AI. Because, as we all know, art is a very subjective thing. I'm not going to get into that entire debate because that's just a whole other thing, it's a whole other headache. I don't have the time for it, I'm not sober enough for it. But what I'm trying to put the focus on here is commercial artworks more than anything. So what has already begun to happen is people are trying to cheat artists out of work by instead using AI that can replicate works of specific people. One AI in particular even had a bank of sorts of different prominent artist styles to choose from, such as Hayao Miyazaki's Studio Ghibli style. R.J. Palmer, a prominent artist known for his hyper-realistic Pokemon illustrations, brought this to many people's attention and went into depth about how this specific AI generator attempted to not only replicate an artist's work, but even copy the watermark. This is going to create big problems for artists not being given any substantial recognition for their creations, which is already a massive problem on the internet anyway, and feeds directly into the rampant art theft present across platforms. Places like Twitter and Instagram are chock full of repost accounts that re-upload images which subsequently takes viewership away from the people who originally made those pieces that go on there. And a lot of the time, these accounts offer no links or even include the names of the people who created these drawings, leaving people who may want to actually support these artists artists either by purchasing a commission, a piece of merchandise, or anything like that with no way to actually get in contact for them to do so. If these generators were using pieces made by famous artists who have long since died, then it would be a different story. But the fact of the matter is, the people these generators are sampling from are still alive, and their livelihoods are being threatened because of what is happening. Another issue is the sheer attitude that people will have towards artists if these generators are to become mainstream. There is already a large stigma of people thinking art is worthless and not a real job and all of these things, blah 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 blah. And yet people still want to create pieces using these AI, and there is a big market online for selling your own goods, such as on Etsy and TikTok, which to me is just a massive contradiction to those statements, but whatever. The issue is the entitlement more so than the value to labour ratio or whatever shitty argument people want to use. My point is, a lot of people want something without having to pay for it, and when they can't, they do their damn best to find ways to get around it. People deserve to be fairly compensated when they do a job. It's as simple as that. I'm not elaborating. There's also the issue of perfectionism. I get the whole aspect of wanting something that looks to be of high quality and drawn with an expected amount of skill, I really do get that, but personally, if the piece has absolutely no flaws, then it becomes very soulless and hollow in my opinion. Humans are not perfect, we never will be, and expecting humans to keep up with a machine is unreasonable and feeds into the nature of people being overworked and underpaid for their labour, which again is a gigantic problem in the art industry because most of the people who are dangling the money in artists' faces are not artists themselves and can't get it through their thick skulls that you can't rush these kinds of things. So with all of this in mind, who in the world would want to do this and why? Who has such a big vendetta against people drawing pictures for a living, for God's sake, that they would invest so much time, money and energy into making artists' lives more difficult? Also, bear in mind with the energy, in order to run these generators on your own computer, let alone host them, they use a lot of electricity, which really isn't good when many places are experiencing a cost of living crisis at the moment in regards to energy bills. So who would be that much of an arsehole to not only want to create a job scarcity in the creative industry, but also add insult to injury by needlessly wasting vast amounts of energy reserves to do it? Well, I have the answer for you. It's this guy. It's this guy right here. This guy. Yeah. For anyone confused on who this is Elon Musk, the guy who owns Tesla. Why am I singling out Elon? Because he has gone on the record to actively denounce crediting artists and has even just outright refused to do so when called out for it. At one point he went on a whole tirade about how he doesn't see the point in crediting people as you can search them up if you care that much. Well, if it was that easy, boy genius, then we wouldn't be having this conversation, would we? Yeah, let me just reverse image search this cool picture I found that's been reposted 28,000 times and has had the name and watermark cropped out because people are too selfish and lazy to post a name and a link alongside it. Real 200 IQ thinking, you incontinent screb. Out of the many, many, many people who disrespect artists, Elon has the largest platform to be able to do so. And that is why he is such a thorn in people's sides when he does things like this. And not only that, as fate would have it, Elon happens to be the founder of several of these AI generators. I'm going to assume the art classes weren't going so well, were they? But in all seriousness, with the way that he has spoken to and about artists, it really doesn't surprise me to find this out, but that doesn't mean that it's not something that really bugs me. And I think that's pretty justified from the way that he has influenced other people to behave towards artists as well. So many of Elon's posse will mock and jab or just outright steal artists' work and will rave about how these AIs are the future. These tech bros enable each other to think that they are so intellectually superior to people who choose to draw and act like they can treat people however they want because of this delusion of intelligence. You're not smart for idolizing a billionaire sociopath. Like, a million people do that. I don't have a problem with people having an interest in something, but I start to have a problem with it when you're a dick about it. So what can we do about it? Well, there isn't really anything we can do when it comes to an unempathetic billionaire, and sadly for his cronies, I don't think there's a solid cure for arrogance yet either, so I wouldn't recommend engaging with them because that's just going to encourage them. But there are some ways that you can support individual artists instead of feeding into this AI hellscape. And the answer is to just support us. So with these AIs, I'm not going to say that we can stop them because factually, there is a lot of money being funneled into the development of these generators, and as such, this presumably means that they are going to be marketed to people very soon as a cheap alternative to real artists, and this will include being marketed to people who may not be as invested in the art world as those of you who may be watching this video. I can't imagine what this is going to do to people's livelihoods if it happens. It's a very worrying thought, but luckily for now, they still have some clear flaws and kinks to resolve before this happens, so hopefully that takes them a while. The only thing that I can really ask of you all watching is to support the creators you enjoy in any way you can. Engage with their works. If you can afford it, then commission the people whose art you like, donate to their Ko-fis, subscribe to Patreons, donate to their stream chats, and if you don't have that bit of spare change, comment on what they make, share it around, ask questions, make requests, just anything. Be obnoxious about it if you have to, but don't let us be brushed to the side and treated like we're disposable, because that will be when you start to see your favourite artists begin to lose their passions and disappear. I don't think the development of technology is an inherently bad thing, but I do think we need to be a lot more conscious about how it can affect everyday people and find ways in which we can all benefit from these technologies while trying to reduce the negative impacts as much as possible. That's all I have to say on this. Thank you so much for watching, and if you liked what I had to say, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Are there any additional thoughts that you want to add to this conversation? Please comment them down below, and I will speak to you all very soon. Stay safe everyone. Bye!